Hi, everybody. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we all meet today. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. My name's Robyn. I'm from Camden Library, and today I'd like to welcome you all in collaboration with the New South Wales Public Library Association to bring you this evening's online author talk with Costa. Costa joins us this evening to discuss his latest, or his debut book, I should say, very exciting, Costa's World. Okay, so Costa, you're a much loved favourite for all ages, all members of the family. Very loved in all families, which is lovely. How did you find the process going from gardener and TV personality to now author with your very first book?
Oh, thanks, Robyn, and good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to broadcast this to you. It would have been lovely to have been in the library all together, but then, you know, in this sense, it's kind of nice because there's people from all over the country. So I just mentioned in the chat there, if you can type in where you're coming from. I'm coming from here in Bondi on Gadigal land of the Eora, and I acknowledge elders past and present, and I suppose I acknowledge that really this is all about connecting to nature and understanding the story of nature and being a part of it and understanding that we are a living part of it. So for me to go into that role of writer, it's funny because I do a lot of writing. I write a regular weekly blog. I'm constantly writing posts every day, be that on Facebook or Instagram or all of the other socials. You have to think and be very frugal with your content in terms of numbers and size of posts and maintaining attention because it's on a rolling scrolling feed, and then I write a lot of forewords and things and other you know, sometimes I've written chapters for other people's books, but doing it for myself was really different, and I've been under that constant not pump, but just a question of, we're going to do it this year, and then we're going to do it this year, and that's been going on for a long time. And credit to Helen Littleton from HarperCollins, who has maintained patience. But it's hard to write about stuff that you're busy doing. And I'm glad. I'm glad I haven't written anything until now, because I think what I write now is really, there's a much greater synthesis of what I've experienced, what I believe, what truths I've picked up along the way, and suddenly, you know, to then have to compile it and then go through the edit. It's been a process, Robyn. It's been a real process, and it's pushed me into new ground. Sustainability. Yeah, okay. Why does it begin in the garden? Look, I use that as a starting point because I think we're all connected that way. And when I talk about the garden, I went through and I explained a definition of a garden, and that we all live on a garden planet, but then we live within a garden region of be it Australia, and then within a state, and those climatic conditions of our area. And then you bring that right down into the garden of your street, and then the garden that may be your balcony, or it could be your windowsill, or it could be your backyard or your front yard or your nature strip or verge out on the street. So I tried to sort of zero it down to illustrate to people that we don't live in a suburb, we live in a landscape. And when you start to see the landscape underneath the suburb, then you can change the context from a neighbourhood, which is a constructed thing with fences and streets and subdivisions and ownership and, you know, boundaries and all this. to actually a naturehood, which is nature doesn't see the fences, even though the fences may frustrate nature. It will slowly take it over. Sadly, I was watching a documentary the other night about Chernobyl, and even with the devastation that's there, you've just got this city that the buildings have got trees growing up over them and through them, and nature is there. It's living underneath us. It will take over whatever we build, because we're only building, even foundations and everything. You see when nature erupts, what we do on the surface is just like, it's just swatted like a fly. So from that point of view, when we really start to understand where we live, we can look at sustainability and say, yes, well, if I'm living in Tasmania, I'm living in a winter climate, so the concept of sustaining myself is different to if I'm living in Darwin and what I need to sustain myself up there. So, and then where you are in your suburb, are you on the south side of a building? What are the consequences of that? Are you facing the water? Do you get the wind? Is that constantly blowing in your house? So I set up that context that everything we bring into our house is about sustaining life in that house. And then I go beyond that and I say, well, sustainability is just a starting point, because what we're actually doing is regenerating. And how do we regenerate? Not just sustain, because in any sustain equation, energy is lost. So regeneration is actually, how do I leave the place better? I mean, we're only here on this planet because of biodiversity. Nature never puts all its cookies in one basket. Plants get pollinated, they evolve, they move, they get shifted from one area to another by wind, by water, by animals, to keep diversity and not have the same things growing off the same genetic material over and over and over, where you then start to get problems. So biodiversity, you can talk about that from the point of view of the garden. You can talk about that from the point of view of your life. How much diversity do I bring into my life? Am I living in a sheltered cultural environment where I only hang out with the same people and have the same perspective and live in a goldfish bowl? Or am I open to cultural differences? Am I open to different food? Is that affecting me? Am I eating a diverse range of foodstuffs to feed my gut microbiome so that it is healthy? And it's only healthy if I eat more and varied things. So diversity in that sense comes right down from the diversity of where we live. I mean, just walking out in different areas affects your health because you take in different microbial inputs. So walking in that park is different to walking in another park and going into the bushland here. And when you talk about the Japanese concept of forest bathing, you're actually bathing your whole entity in nature and life. Whereas when we live in these sterile, over-sanitized, air-conditioned, climate-controlled environments, we wonder why we become ill and don't have resilience, because we're not testing our immune system, we're actually reducing it. So in that sense, biodiversity covers so many layers. The more diverse plants we have, the more insects we bring. The more insects we bring, then that brings more the birds, because the birds feed on the insects. They don't feed on that grain holder that you put out. That's not what birds are meant to have. So then that brings lizards and spiders and invertebrates, and they form the basis of a food chain that we're a part of. And if we knock out one part of that food chain and then wonder why there's no birds, well, that's because there's no insects, and the insects aren't here because we keep wiping them out with a blue zapper saying, oh, we want the place to be safe. Safety is something that biodiversity encompasses by virtue of difference, not by sanitizing it to within an inch of its life. in the community section, I talk about community gardens, and I talk about them in much the same light that I spoke about what we call home and community. What is community? We have our family community, which is our immediate family. Then we have our community of our local houses. That's our neighbourhood or our neighbourhood community. And then we have our school community. And then we have our work community. And then you might have a business community, and you have a statewide community, and then a national community, and then an international community. So again, it comes down to the lens that we put over life. And when we start to see these different communities for what they are, we can then understand that they're living things and they don't just exist. Like, to start a community garden, for example, there's certain steps you need to take. And the more inclusiveness you have in that, the more you say, this isn't about the garden, it's about the gardening of the spirit. You know, that's why I sort of called it gardening the soil, the soul, and the suburbs. You can set up the best community garden with the most amazing soil, but if you haven't grown the soul of it, you're not going to have people there, and you're going to be on your own. And that's fine, but that's not by definition what a community garden is. And that community garden can be your back garden that you feed for your family, but then you start swapping. You start to get connected with something like crop swap, and then you grow that community immediately by saying, hey, I've got a heap of zucchinis. I'm going to go to the crop swap this weekend, which is being held. And you know, that's what I love about something like that. It ties in with everything we've just spoken about, because they go, well, we're not going to have the crop swap every week in the same spot, because that's not healthy, because it's just providing for one group. Let's take it around. And then it drags people into new areas. And then you swap and you say, well, you know, your yard is north facing. You can grow a lot of sun loving things. Mine gets the morning sun. I'll grow those more tender things. Someone else gets the full afternoon sun only, because they've got a building blocking their east side. So they have to grow more of the dry, resilient mongrel herbs and Mediterranean kind of plants that can take it. So, you know, from a community point of view, there's so many ways we can look at our gardens. And then you look at something like Farm It Forward, where they say, you've got a garden, we have people that we want to get growing and urban farming. You give us the space, we'll give you a box of veggies every week. And so that then initiates a whole new layer of community networking and growing. So a community garden to me, and I get this across in that chapter, that it's not just this council fenced perception that people have of a community garden, that, oh yes, that's a local community garden. There's so many different ways. My community garden is my nature strip. Yeah. Someone else's is the little plot that they've got in pots at the front of their block of units, and that's their unit community. So yeah, that is, I could talk about that till midnight, just because once you start to get into that side of it, you'll start to see that community is as limited as you make it. And I think there's, in some ways, we need to brush off definition. We need to think about the language we use and think about new definitions, and not even prescriptive definitions, but more so just new inclusions. Yeah. To look at it in much the same light as I was saying about looking at your suburb as a naturehood rather than a neighbourhood. What are the benefits? I could rattle these off until, you know, until next week. But the idea behind getting children involved is that you actually build new relationships. You foster hope, but you also grow responsibility. And you don't need to define them as chores. because it's all, again, about the language we use. And I think rather than this being a chore, we say, well, these are our obligations. These are our duties to nurture. So if we want this, if we want to sow a seed of hope, and that seed could be disguised as a carrot, a snow pea, a tomato at this time of the year, whatever it is. But we're saying, okay, let's put this in and let's look after this much like a pet. And when we do that, and when we use inclusive language and we say we're going to do it together, it's that togetherness that builds family bonds. And then you tie that into separating the food scraps on the kitchen bench to then understand what worm farming is. And then you say, well, let's become worm farmers. And so you layer in a wonderful narrative around growing the soil. And then by doing that, you start to put on the goggles, the citizen science goggles, and say, well, there's science involved here. And when we talk about the science of soil and the science of pollination, and then we say, well, if we do this to the soil, the plant will be healthy and it will be more resilient and not be prone to attack. But, oh, what are these insects? Oh, these are insects that are chewing on the fresh growth of the plant. But if we recognize what's that there? Oh, that's actually a parasitic wasp, which comes and lays eggs and kills not only the insects, but then kills the young of the insects that were going to be eating your plants. So we start to piece together this narrative around not just sustainability, not just health and growing your own food, but about responsibility for the entire vision that, you know, we have to grow a perspective. And if we don't set something up, but we need to set it up in a way that we allow them, we might put one marker out, but then we want them to put the next one. Mm-hmm. If we're continuously putting the marker out, then we're not making those markers of ours exciting enough. And for me, that's what makes every day a wonderful new day, because I'm not selling the same story. Mm-hmm. Different notions and different potions, and how you stir that cauldron of excitement is your opportunity. And there's so many groups out there, and that's where in all the chapters I have dig deeper, go in, follow this link, have a little look on this Facebook page, go into this group's website, follow, be it Fair Food Forager, and start to go to cafes and restaurants that think about where their food supply chain comes from. And they're groups that support local employment and support local businesses. And these are ways that, you know, the garden really, that's a front. I've just used that as a shop front, but inside there's all sorts of wheelings and dealings going on that take it out of, out of this whole idea of it just being gardening. It's not just gardening. Gardening is the wonderful, it's this platform, it's this canvas that you can use as the entry. And then once you're in there, you go into land care, you go into bush care, bush heritage and junior land care, and you go into native insects, you go into our native bees and understanding those pollinators. But then once you go in there, you get into entomology. And what's it all about? It's about science. And in science, we get this chance to break down the distrust that's developed over the last few years around truth. And the garden speaks truth. It tells you the truth. There's no fake news there. In the garden, look, of course, there's a lot of people that can't have chooks. If you're living in an apartment, you can't have chooks in your apartment. But in saying that, I know a friend who recently set up chickens in their apartment on the grounds because they had 4 young families there. It was a block of 4 units, got everyone together and said, let's do it. It's going gangbusters. It's changed the entire atmosphere of that block because they had chickens. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily going to be the case for high rises and things like that, but you can connect with chickens at the local community garden. You might connect with chickens with the neighbours, find people, jump on something like share waste, where you can take your food scraps to someone nearby who's composting. And the chances are that many composters have chickens too. And so there's lots of different ways that you can connect. If you do have a yard, by all means, if you've got a yard and children, but forget that, it's not just for kids, big kids, you there, listening to this talk, let Chookie tell you, you need chickens. Just get some chooks in your life. It's going to change your life. You'll never be the same. So yeah, it's not just about chooks for kids. A couple of chooks in the backyard, and I've got some dimensions in there. What's a reasonable dimension? But they're incredible. Talk about therapy in terms of pets. They eat food scraps. They create fertilizer and manure. They look after insects as well. To me, I rate the eggs way down the bottom because they do so much else for me. But for people that like eggs, you get eggs as well. So yeah, don't rule it out, and don't see it as work, because it's not work. It's just part of, if you have a dog, if you have a cat, if you have chooks, you know, they're unbelievable. I love them. Gardens in small spaces are something that, when you look at the craziness of the real estate juggernaut, more and more people will be living in smaller and smaller spaces, not just in terms of apartments, but even houses. Like, houses are being built on a 350 or 400 square metre block, and the house takes up most of it, and you've just got these little spaces. So even though I could be talking to people in a freestanding place, they're actually gardening in really small spaces. And those spaces are actually quite challenging, because there's a fence and it might be below the fence line and it faces south, or it only sees this much sun from the middle of the day for 2 hours. So all of these constraints that I talked about early on in the setup, to understand a garden and to step out of a real estate perception saying, oh, well, it faces north. Yeah, that's the front yard where the car park is, and that's it. Like, my backyard is facing south. It doesn't see any sun in the winter. So these little details are what, getting to know and understand small spaces, I say don't be alarmed, because what you're seeing happening now, you're seeing people inside creating incredible indoor plant gardens, because that's all they have. They have an apartment and maybe a small balcony, but then they start going vertically. So you start to think about how you can use vertical space in a small courtyard and work that out. You might have 7 square meters, but then when you look at the wall there, and the wall here, you've got another 15 square meters to use vertically. And more people are getting into that. And the systems for managing that, for hanging baskets, for creating vertical walls, for creating wicking beds in small containers, which are great for balconies where the wind is consistent. And as a gardener, it could dry out very quickly. Whereas a wicking bed in a container means that it has a water well and the plants stay watered, and can withstand those conditions that I talk about in the early chapters, and in understanding the microclimates around your growing space. So small space gardening is not a constraint. the energy, effort, and in some cases, the money I see invested into small spaces, it's well spent, because we're not just talking edible, we're talking therapy, looking out onto a beautiful green wall, having a wonderful space where you can come and sit, and there's scented flowers, or there are scented plants, or there's flowers across the whole year, so that you look out and there's your horticultural therapy. So yeah, small spaces. There's so much room for big ideas, and I love them. And the more I do what we do with Gardening Australia, and you see people like Sophie Thompson and the work that she's doing a wonderful project at the moment where she's got 2 containers. It's called Grow Up. And the whole project is about utilising small space, not just tiny homes, but small spaces. So it's happening. The information's out there. And when you start to go to these dig deeper links that I share, the point is, I haven't got them all in there, but when you go to these people, then you follow their links. And then I'm afraid, sorry, you're done. You're going to be in this team. Permaculture. Many people have heard about it. Some people have never heard about it. I put the term easy peasy permaculture because I wanted it to be able to explain to people in very, very accessible terms that a lot of things that they're already doing is permaculture based. And I didn't want them to be caught up in definitions or, oh yeah, I've heard about it. No, it doesn't matter what you've heard. Just come in and get this sort of slant that I'm putting on it, so that I can then lead you deeper into an understanding of the principles and the practices, so that you can really start to appreciate that some of those behaviors and habits that you currently exhibit can be channeled into a definition of permaculture. So permaculture is really about a way of looking. It's not just about a way of defining a garden in terms of different zones, that this is what I visit regularly, this is what I visit maybe every couple of days, and then this is the orchard, which is further away, and all very well thought out. It's that applied to every aspect of your life. How you operate in your kitchen, how you operate in your relationships, how you operate in your understanding and connection with nature. And when you start to apply the principles and you just pick them one by one, you start to pick any one of those principles, and you can start to apply that to how you deal with waste in your house, or how you deal with purchases. And that's really what I wanted, to be able to say, hey, just come in here and have a look around with a really open mind. And you know, having been involved with permaculture for a long time now, I wanted to make sure that the language I used made people feel comfortable, and then the links and all of the dig deeper gives them the chance to go way down that road and follow up, maybe do an introduction to permaculture, maybe do a permaculture design course, get a book, get the book, or get an intro book, so that, you know, this is about bridging. You know, I want to take away intimidation and show that this is all blanket and arms around and hugs, not sort of like, oh, you know, I know, or they know and you don't, and you can sort of come and join the club if you do these things. No, all of the people that I mention, and I talk about my experience and my knowledge of wonderful people within the history and structure of permaculture, and say, look at these methods, look at how you can do it. I'll introduce you to this gnome, because this is Costa the garden gnome. and from a, if we want to continue that theme, this has been resolved. So Kate McQuillan from Dirt Girl World didn't want to make plastic merchandise and then see them floating in rivers and broken arms on streets and then get thrown out. And it took maybe 8 years before the idea crystallized that we would make these dolls, but we don't make them, you make them. So these get sent to you as a tea towel, which can be cut out with grandma or mum and dad or an aunt or uncle. The offcuts of the tea towel go in and as stuffing, an old pair of undies, whatever else you have, old cotton, whatever you can put in there. It gets stitched up. It wasn't printed with it's been printed with veggie safe colours. So it's not full tilt. You can see it's already warm. It's not. So these are decisions that you can make about very specific principles around waste and understanding the cycle. So this little character is and then there's Dirt Girl and Scrap Boy as well. But that to me is such a wonderful way that we can think about all the things we touch. This, on the other hand, was made by a wonderful shopkeeper in Nannup for the Nannup Flower and Garden Festival. And I think they stitched up 200 of those and were selling them during the festival. And these are little super Costas. Kind of those ways of looking at the things that we bring into our world and taking responsibility for those things and saying, no, I'm not going to buy that because it's cheap and it's going to break and it's going to become waste and it's going to go to landfill and it's going to be there forever. So, it doesn't have to be this dictatorial approach. It's just my dollar doesn't need to be spent making merchandisable waste. Yeah. And it's cool. I like that. It's really fun. Nicholas, thanks for joining us, and thanks everyone. It's awesome to have you here, and thanks for all the questions. Does technology have a place? Yeah, of course it does. Technology does have a place in the garden. When you think about the recent Aussie backyard bird count, 160,000 people submitted, 160,000 submissions, counts were submitted over the week and counted over 5,050,000 birds. And that can be done with a simple app where you go outside and as you see a bird, you put it in on the app. Children are using cameras to be a part of the Atlas of Living Australia, an iNaturalist, or the Great Southern BioBlitz, where they go out and photograph any living things in their garden to understand nature. Frog ID, you can go out, hear a frog wherever you are, whether you're on school holidays, away from home, whether you're walking the streets, hear a frog, you hit the frog ID, you record that sound, that immediately gets sent to the Australian Museum, and they send back and say, yeah, that's a Perrin's tree frog. Like, this is so cool. Like, it's so unbelievably cool that we're making science cool, and we have to make it cool, and we have to stem the tide of attacking scientists, stem the tide of attacking, and it being nerdy. It's not nerdy. These are truths, and this is where citizen science, and the citizen science conference is on at the moment. Look it up and come join it over the next couple of days. But yes, citizen science and technology is a wonderful way, but you'll find that as you get people into gardening, they'll use the technology, but they'll also have the quiet time too, where they're just sowing, propagating, mulching, weeding. Oh, good question, Amanda. I first sat down and we came up with a rough table of contents, a long time ago. It sat for 7-8 years, I'd say, and then I I started to write it in earnest. I said at the end of 2019, all right, I'll write it. And then, so over 2020, I kind of got in and wrote it. And then it went into the edit towards the end of the year. And then this year it got, you know, there were delays and challenges with everything that was going on. But the edit then rolled out over the first half of this year, and then out it came. So yeah, it's pretty amazing, given that I was getting a knock on the door for probably 7 or 8 years. The cat side of things, if you get some dog hair from someone who's got a dog and a ute, not from a coiffure where it's all been shampooed. I mean a dirty, manky bottom of a ute. Get plenty of that, put it in an orange basket, an orange net, and nail that on the fence in a few different places. That it does work. I know that does deter possums because they smell the dog. If the cat is going to come in, get water into that area. They don't like sitting where it's wet, and spray it with water, and then just add compost to the area, which will build up your beneficial microbes that will create that biodiversity that will keep the soil decomposers doing their job.
Lovely.
Oh, Finn, I think the best part of being in Dirt Girl world is that I get to tell stories to girls and boys like you. And you want to know the truth? The stories aren't that much different. They're no different to what I talk to adults about. If anything, when I talk to you, I get to be a bit more fun, and I get to laugh, and I get to make funny examples, and I get to talk about poo and wee and farts and all that sort of stuff. And I like that, but I can't really do that on the telly. I can talk about cow poo, but I got to sort of change the language. If we're talking about soldier flies, when I talk to adults, we say, oh, these are soldier fly larvae. Whereas when I talk to you boys and girls, I go, yeah, they're maggots. And they climb in and they eat their way out of things. And, that's what I like. Telling the same information, but in fun ways. So, yeah, and with Dirt Girl, we get to meet girls and boys like you, show them how to do things and give them the freedom and give you the key to being you and to love nature from your heart. And because if you love nature from your heart, and when you learn about nature and you understand all of the connections and you understand that those ants are needed by that plant because they pollinate the plant, then you'll look after the ants and that'll look after the plant and the flowers will look after the birds, and then we look after the world. And that's what we want, is for you to be able to stand up and fight for the planet. And the best way you can do it is with information. So that's what I love, giving you boys and girls lots of stories about how to live in the world and learn from you boys and girls too, because the way you see the world is important to us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, Ballina. Well, the thing is, Donna, up there, you've got a few more options. You could look at a variety of things. You could look at things like, there's certain grevilleas that are nice, like Grevillea wimpara gem is a beauty. It grows dense. I mean, hopefully a sound barrier absorber. I'd love to use a native Australian plant that produces fruit even better. Of course you can use, there's a variety of lily pillies and syzygiums that are a variety of lily pilly that don't get the little psyllid, the leaf curl. They're a good option. Yes, I would agree with going with natives, because you're going to then create habitat. When you go with things that are just, photinias and these exotics where people prune them to be these walls, well, there's nowhere for wildlife to go in. And they offer very little floral service to nature. They're the flowers are few and far between. So the other thing to think about, and I think very cautiously about, like, whatever your reason for the hedge, if there's specific areas, like there's a window there that we want to black out, think more about putting a specific plant that will grow up to the window height rather than making a big wall. If it's a big sound you want to block out, then in those cases, it's not only about planting a wall like that, but it's actually about planting with staggered planting, so low growing, medium, and then high, so that you actually push the sound and the wind up and over. They're just little details, and you make a more biodiverse garden bed that will bring wildlife and wildlife, airborne wildlife, which is really valuable. And then, of course, you'll bring lizards and other beneficial insects. Yeah, look, I think, you know, when it comes to the garden planet and looking after the whole planet, because we live on a garden planet, when you go up into space and you look back, not that any of us need to go up there. I would rather see all this money going up into space be going down into the soil, because we have so much that we can learn from the soil that we know very little about. And the actual biggest living things on the planet are fungi, mycorrhizal fungi that are massive, absolutely massive. They leave the biggest whale, you know, they're 10 times larger than that, like huge. So I'd love to see us flying into the earth and not digging it up, but exploring it to learn about everything that we can gain from that. We can gain so much in terms of medicines and beneficial substances that we can use. So anyway, so the question was, I got a bit waylaid there. Yeah, so my favourite gardener of the big planet is Sir David Attenborough. And I just love the fact that he has collected information for a long time, and that's what we can do. And we can add this to our toolbox, to our wheelbarrow of understanding. And Sir David has been doing that for decades, for eight or 9 decades. And he inspires me with his insights and his vision. So yes, from a big global gardener perspective, he's my inspiration. And then in terms of other gardeners that I love, I mean, you know, I only need to look at the gardeners on the show on Gardening Australia, and each and every one of them are inspiring because they do things in their own way. Mm-hmm. And whether you're looking at Jerry, or whether you look at Sophie, or whether it's Tino or Jane, who's been doing it since the show began 30 years ago, and then you've got Millie and Tino and Hannah, who's on as our permaculture guest presenter and educator. All of these people, and of course Clarence and what he brings in terms of Indigenous First Nations understanding of community and that history of knowledge. Yeah, all of them inspire me. They inspire me because they're all different. I suppose depending on where and what your context is, Lauren, I would connect with your local land care. I would connect with any local Indigenous groups to learn about that social history, and then that social science, and then the Indigenous science, and then combine all of this information together as best you can. And when you throw that blanket of inclusion out, and when you see who's growing, who are some of the growers in your community, who are some of the people, and you have to do a little bit of asking. But by doing that, you'll really find a local pulse. And when you find that local pulse and you start to understand the local plants, then you can start to plant them with a certainty that they will respond to what you do, and then you'll get results that will bring new people in because of what they see. Stepping out can sometimes feel like you're untethered, but when you include lots of people with you, that stepping out is in the knowledge that you're tethered to those behind you. And then even though you're sticking out from the pack and you feel a bit exposed, as it settles and it grows and you grow, think about growing the people involved as much as growing the plants, is what I'd say. And even though that may seem like, this is going to take time and delay the growing, no, because then the growing will actually thrive. It's like saying, I'm going to put a 150 litre tree in there because I want it quickly, when actually putting in a 150 millimetre pot, it will outgrow that big tree within a couple of years. Yeah. Because it came there and said, this is all I know. Whereas the big tree's been in a nursery, it's been protected, it's been fed 3 meals a day, and then you put it out in a paddock and it's like, I'm on my own here. Whereas the other plant will go, this is pretty good. Here we go. So think about it like that it's about growing the network as you grow the plants, not just sticking plants in, because then it's like sticking a plant in the middle of a paddock and saying, I want a screen. Mm-hmm. And I'll pay what I can. The money isn't going to do it. It's that priceless weaving of connection. Look, beans are a beauty because beans grow very quickly. And the best part about beans is picking them off the plant and just eating them fresh, right? Like that. They love it. It's the same with snow peas. They're a pretty easy one as well. Of course, simple things to sow by seed and grow. I mentioned this on radio this morning. Radish is a really easy one. You can get a little grow tray and put the seed out and then watch them sprout, and then, literally be able to start picking them within 3 weeks, 21 days. And they're small, and then the smaller they are, they're not as spicy. And then the kids will go and taste them. Tomatoes, I always mention, because something like cherry tomatoes are an easier grow, because the tomatoes are a little more resilient. They have a thicker skin. They're not as prone to attack. Of course, corn's a pretty good one. I've got corn growing at the moment. You just need to make sure you keep the water up to it. And then it gets to that point where the roots are down and it just goes. It'll sit there. If you grow it from your own seed. But even, look, when you're starting out, don't be afraid to have a go in both camps. Grow some things from seed, but also grow some things by seedling. And what you do is go for an excursion. Take the children for an excursion, a fun outing to the nursery, and then let them pick a couple of things and then say, okay, let's give that a go and let's give this a go. It's about inclusiveness, not prescriptive, this is what we're doing. And if it fails, assess and analyse why, and then try again. Because I think I saw a question there. Someone asked me, I saw it scroll through about, what happens if you fail or whatever. No, just pull that word out and say learn. What can I learn from that? And you only need to speak to anyone and they'll say, yeah, that's going really well and all the accolades, that's fine. But there's been 4 other things go in there. I have major failures, but then they give me the knowledge to find success. Absolutely. They can help because it's a rough surface and they don't like going over it. Probably the best thing you can do with snails, and I noticed there that Katie said snap peas is another easy one to grow as well. Thanks, Katie. The other thing to do is go out and observe now at this time of night when it starts to cool down, because they'll come out at night. If you get a speckle of rain, get out there, because that's when they'll be out there, and check again in the morning. And you can see that in multiple ways. It's connection. It's a way of seeing whether things need watering. You're out there watching what's going on, and it's also a chance to lift up, see what's going on, and then remove them. But remember that the snails are also valuable food because they're predated on by birds as well. So you might want to put them somewhere where they can be seen, and that way the birds can eat them. I know that chickens eat them as well. So think about it in those terms. Just throwing snail pellets out, you know, it kills the snails, but it also kills the building blocks of the food chain. The thing about writing the book is when you're writing chapters, and then the chapter goes out to get edited, and then it comes back, and you're seeing it all disjointed. And then there was many months go by before I had a chance to then see it all as one again, and I only saw it on a computer screen. So probably one of the most rewarding things was seeing chapters come together, and then come together with the graphics, because Brenna Quinlan, look Brenna up, everyone. She's done an amazing job with the graphics. They're so special, and they give such a feeling to the page, and to the look, like how you react and respond. Seeing then the graphics go in, and then the quotes pulled out, and then blocks of information, and watching all of these layers. And Lisa Reedy, who's the graphic designer, did a phenomenal job. And between Lisa and Brenna, the visual look of the book, that was that part when suddenly my writing was this much, but then the graphics and all that brought the writing to life. And when you see it on a page, and then Barbara McClenaghan, who was the editor, who said, no, well, we need another quote there because we've got a graphic there. And like they see a book page with the same clarity that I see a garden, and go, no, you need something there, or this balances out, or whatever. So yeah, seeing that stage was quite, it was moving. It was moving because your words came to life. Like my writing suddenly came to life in graphics, and you just thought, oh, this is real. That's interesting. I've seen some great pumpkin gardens. I saw one pumpkin garden up in Armidale where they had 10 by 10, and they planted 5 pumpkins, and they ended up getting 750 kilos of pumpkins out of it. You know, but not everyone has 10 by 10, because that was, 3/4 of a ton of pumpkins from 5 pumpkins. It was nuts. So, you plant 1 pumpkin. Remember, the most important thing you need to do is prepare a really good hole for it, and layer your manures in it, layer your rock minerals in it, build that, fill that out into a beautiful, rich planting hole. And if you make that 500 by 500 or 1 metre by 1 metre, and then you put your pumpkin in there, then if you don't have the space, you can train it. Train it along the edge of a path, train it out to where the sun is, and just let it roam. It doesn't have to dominate one big area. It can be in a garden bed, come over the edge and run down the side of the footpath. And then the pumpkins are sitting on solid, solid ground. Or, and then the other thing to remember is make sure when your pumpkins are sitting on the ground, it's kind of nice to sit something under it so that they don't get wet and they don't rot. I mean, that's more what people do when they're trying to grow a giant pumpkin for one of those competitions. They sit it on a pallet, they build a roof over it, and then they just pump them up. You don't have to pump your pumpkins up like you're trying to win the Easter show or anything. But no, you don't need a big area. Like you can run it. You can run it over the path. You can run it, you know, even across the grass if you need to. And you know, it's not going to kill it. It will be fine.
Yeah.